Okay, good morning, everybody. We're going to pick up from the Mishnah on Daf Nun Beis, Amud Beis. Mirz Hashem get to the end of Daf Nun Tes, Amud Beis. Zok the Mishnah, Oiv kachavim, mevatel, avodas kachavim, shaloi v'shachaver. The Mishnah tells us a guy. We're going to see how it can be mevatel it. But if he has an avodah Zarah, once he's mevatel it doesn't have the halachas of avodah Zarah. However, regarding the Yisrael, ein mevatel, avodas kachavim, shel oiv kachavim. Once the Yisrael owns an avodah Zarah, it's impossible for him to be mevatel it. Another halacha, mevatel avodas kachavim, mevatel misham shal. By default, accessories to the avodah zarah, which is a tuffle to the avodah zarah, is mevatel. However, bitul misham shal. If you're only going to go and be mevatel the accessories, then the halacha is misham shemutarm. However, the ikar avodah zarah is still asur v'hi asur. Zok the heilige Gemara. Masnile Rabbi l'Rab Shimon b'Rabbi Oiv kachavim mevatel avodas kachavim shaloi v'shachaveroi. Over here we're saying that the Oiv kachavim can be mevatel his own and his friends. Amalei Rabbi. However, this is our Mishnah that we just saw. However, Rabbi tells him Shani Salani Bi'al Secha. Amalei tells him, Rabbi, however you taught us that Oiv kachavim mevatel avodas kachavim shaloi, and we should underline this word v'shal Yisrael. However, in our Mishnah we saw it sounds like you can't be mevatel the Yisrael. Right away, the Gemara interjects and Gemara asks, Yisrael mikum mevatlo? We already learned this last week. Vaha says in the pasuk, V'sam b'seis ksiv, that he has to be put in a gniza that he cannot be mevatlo it. Amar v'ilberei dervalos le'nitzrucha. The only halacha would be sheyesh loy ba shutvus. In a scenario where the shutvus, that's where it's negeya, where a person can be mevatlo, the guy can be mevatlo the chelik of the Yisrael. Fact, the Gemara, Zaktamar bi'aldusa ma'ikasavar, b'skanusa ma'ikasavar. And that the Gemara is Masber bi'aldusei savar the Yisrael Aidaita da'oiv kachavim palach. The only reason why this yid is bechlal serving this avodah zarah is because it's shutafis. However, kivan da'oiv kachavim mevatel den avshei the Yisrael nami mevatel. Once the oiv kachavim goes and is mevatel it, so to the Yisrael has the das and says I don't need it. However, when he got older, it's kanusei savar the Yisrael Aidaita den avshei palach. He's his own independent mind, and he's serving his avodah zarah for himself. And ki mevatel oiv kachavim din avshei. However, the Yisrael loy batel. On a simple level, he's not mevatel the Yisrael. Iko demasnila sefer. What Rav Alas just told us that we're talking about a shutvas. Some learn it's going on the sefer. What's the sefer? That it says Yisrael einoi mevatel avodas kachavim shel oivets kachavim. Fact more pshita. Only a guy. We learned this already that only a guy could be mevatel it. On that, Amar Rav Hila b'Rei Rav Alas. We're on the top Nun Gimel Amar Aleph. Loi netzrucha comes to tell us in a scenario elo sheyesh loy ba shutvus. Or in a scenario where the Yisrael has a shutvus. So what's the chiddush? Kamash milon the Yisrael u'deloi mevatel da'oiv kachavim. However, the kachavim din avshei mevatel. That's what we're coming to tell us that kachavim himself could be mevatel. We don't say what would be the havmin of Rashi's mask. We say just like the Yisrael's shutvus is not mevatel, you would think maybe the guys also, and that the Kamashmalin is that a guy could. Ika the Mashmalah Braisa, again, on what Rav Alas says, Rabbi Shimon ben Asi Aimer. What's this Braisa? Zaktav Shimon Abodis Kachavim, Shel Yisrael, Ein Lo Betela Oilamis. Once it belongs to a Yid, there's no way out. You have to what? Destroy it. My Oilamis. On that, Amar Bilaber Rav Alas, Le Nitzracha, Elo Yesh Loi La'oiv Kachavim Bo Shutvus. Again, the scenario where there is a Shutvus, and the Kamash Malon is, again, the Yisrael Adaited and Avshei Polach, like we saw earlier, Memelo, you cannot be Mevatel. So how are you Mevatel the Avodah Zarah? Zok the Mishnah, Keitza Mevatla, Kata Reish Eizna. If comes the guy and cuts the ear of the Avodah Zarah, Reish Chaitmor, his nose, Reish its bar with the fingertip. Or Pichsa, you dented it out. Afa Pishalei Chisra, even if you think about it, he didn't cut anything off, he gave a nice zekt, a nice geschmacka, punched it. Bitla. However, rock bifanel, if you just spit at it, or hished bifanel, you urinated, did a bezayint it, or gera, you schlepped it, or zarg bas atzaya, harei zu, eino betela, and Rashi's masber, why the lefum shaita rasachala? He only did it because he's very upset. His anger took over. However, v'hadach palachla. Eventually he goes back and he does the avodah zarah because he didn't do real damage. However, the last case is machroi and mashkana. We're going to see exactly in the Gemara. If a person sold it or he took it as a collateral, Rabbi Oimer Bito, the Chachamim Oimrim, Loi Bito. We're going to see this machlokes Rabbi and Chacham. Zok the Gemara ki lechisra, in a scenario where you gave it a zetz, a pichsa apish lechisra. For why is it mevutel then? B'may bitlo. On that, Zok Reb Zera, Shepichsa b'fanel. And Rashi says, you destroy the image of the Avodah Zarah by giving it a zet, and therefore it's considered batal. Rokak b'fanel, the hishtem b'fanel. Minon immediately in such a scenario, we did such a bezaintit that it's not mevotel. On that, where do we see this concept that Rashi said already in the Mishnah that a person goes and he does it? He does one the Mishnah Nun Gimel Amud Aleph that he goes to Gemara and then he goes and he's mevatel it and he goes back to his Avodah Zarah. Where do we see this concept? On that, Zok the Gemara from the pasuk on Mechizkiah Adam Akra says in the pasuk as follows. This is discussing the goy, this Avodah Zarah. V'haya, says in the pasuk, V'haya chiyirav, he's going to be hungry. V'iskatzev, he's going to be very upset at his getchka. The kilkul b'malkun, he's going to curse out his what, his avodah zarah. However, the kilkul b'malkun uvelahav ufana lamalo. So he's going to go back to the Rebbeinu Shalom, see the truth. However, v'chsev basrei vel eretz yabit v'heina tzor v'chashecha. And it gets to darkness. What happens eventually? He goes back to his avodah zarah. The goyim the afagav the kil malkum elahav ufana lamala. What happens right afterwards? El eretz yabit. He goes back, right back to his avodah zarah. So we see this concept. Just because you did it is not a raya, it's not a makor to tell us that you're mevatel your avodah zarah. Rather, you're going to go back to it and serve it. Zok the Gemara, the Mishnah told us Mechra Meshkana. We saw it's a machlekes Rabbi Yomi Bito, v'cham Yomi Loi Bito v'chulei. Zeiri Amr Rav Yechanan, Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba Mirav. Chadam as machlekes, we're going to see Betzorif. Tzorif is a smelter. And Stam, the reason why they mentioned Tzorif, because the Stam Tzorif, he goes and melts the metals. That's the whole point why I mentioned Bechlal, this smelter. So machlekes is Betzorif oivit kechavim. In a scenario where you sold, the guy went to his friend and he sold it to his Goyish smelter. In such a case, he's saying, Elamai, you're not going to serve Avodah Zarah. Why? Because he's going to go melt it. And that's the machlekes. We're going to see Rabbi and Rabbana. Avo Betzorif Yisrael, where it's obvious the Yisrael is not going to have a tzad to go continue being over this Avodah Zarah. Devrakol Bito. That's one man damar. V'chad damar Betzorif Yisrael machlekes. One wants to say even by Yisrael is the machlekes if it's mevatel or not. So Yibayluhu Betzorif Yisrael machlekes Avo Tzorif Oivik Chacham. We're going to according to the sheet that says that Tzorif Yisrael is a machlekes. Rabbi Chachamim. What is the halacha regarding the Oivik Chachamim? Do we say Avo Tzorif Oivik Kachavim Deva Koloi Bitol? Because Ma'andach you have a machlekes by a yid where there's anything to say is more of a tzad to say he's going to go be melt this Avodah Zarah. So by a guy, the Kul Amma agrees. Aidelma Bein Bazeh or Bein Bazeh machlekes. So maybe we could say no, even in a guy where there's actually machlekes by Yisrael or not. So let's bring a raya Toshmad Amar Rabbi Nirin Dvarai Kishemachur Lechavol. We're going to see the Rebbe says, what does Rebbe hold? Rebbe holds it's mevotel. So he says when it looks like they're going to go chabol mamash lashon wounded to destroy it, in a scenario where they're going to continue to serve the Avodah Zarah, then I agree that what? That it's not mevotel. So my lechavol my loivda. Ilem, you're going to tell me the mamash lechavol mamash means to what? To destroy the Avodah Zarah, loivda mamash to continue serving it. What's the having? My time in the mandama beetle. How can you understand? He's going to continue serving Avodah Zarah. You have a having to say that it's mevotel. My time the mandama beetle in the scenario of what? Of chavola. Avad is going to go destroy it. Elallah lechavla means misha asid lechavla. Who's that? Who's the person who might do it? The man that serves Yisrael. That's a person who might in the future go destroy it. And la'ivda lemisha asid la'ivda. Who's that? The guy. Umani tzarv oivik kachavim. What do we see from there? Vishmami no bein bezeh. Clearly we see that bein the oivik kachavim bein the Yisrael is the machlekes. And that's like more no. Loi hachi kamen. This is what he's saying. Amir Rabbi nirin dvar lechavera kishemachra lechavla. In a scenario you sold it to destroy it. Who would that be? That's obvious. Umanu is the tzorif Yisrael because he's going to go melt it. Shav chavera loy nachlaku alai elo kishemachra loivda. The whole time they have a haminit to say that it's not mevotel, yes or no. That's only when he did it to sell it to what? To continue serving it. Oh, my in fact, the Gemara, according to the Amar that says there's no machlekes when he sell it to Yisrael. In fact, the Gemara meisvei alokeach grutais. Grutais is like metal scraps. Mina oivdei kechavim. Umatza bahan avodas kechavim. He bought a trailer full of metal scraps, and you find the avodas are in it. Se'im acheloi nasan ma'ois. If it's before you bechlal gave the money, then mashach, and you did already mashicha, yachzer, you could give it back. In such a case, you can return it. However, mishanasan ma'ois mashach, once you took it and you already gave the money and did a Mashiach and Rashi's Masechet, but we have the same Mekach Tos in both scenarios. Rather than the case we already give the money, so we're geyser on you. Then Yoylech Liyam Melech. So Frek Gemara, this is the riot. This is the kasha, the one who's saying there's no machlokes when he saw Yisrael. Okay, I understand. Who's the sheet of this brisa? Mani Rabbanani. Rabbanan is the one who held that what? That that's not a mivuto in the case of Avodah Zarah. Eli Amrit, that you're going to tell me who is this brisa that tells us these metal scraps is not what? Is not mivuto. My answer is no, you can't compare the metal scraps. The Haim Gemara was, we thought the seller, the Oivik Kechavim, wanted to get rid of the Avodah Zarah. And I would say no. The Oivik Kechavim himself didn't realize that in the container there was Avodah Zarah. Shani Hashem, that Daita Dukutai Zavin. A Daita Avodah Kechavim Life Zavin. He didn't even chap the guy, so Meila Avad, everyone agrees with Kula Alma. And it's near where the Oivik Kechavim by mistake sold you. In the bucket, in the truckload of Avodah Zarah, there's no Haminit to say that what? That it's Mevut. Tanu Rabbana. We're going to see 4 different scenarios. The Gemara on the base is going to tell us why we need all these 4 cases. Love Allah, he took it literally as a collateral against it. Oisha nafla Allah ma'paylas, you have a Zarah, and the whole building collapsed in it. Oisha ganvu listin, or robbers came and took it away from him. Oisha nichu abaylim, or they themselves went. V'hochalim dinasayam. What's the halacha on Gimel on the base? Im asidin lachzor k'mechames Yeshua. The Gemara is going to ask. Mechames Yeshua, they didn't come back. They all died. But the Gemara is going to talk about this. Eino betelo. And the Gemara says, I need all these 4 cases. Why? Tana lava. If you're going to tell me only the first case where he took it as a collateral, lava lema delay zavna. Haraya, he only did it because he was desperate, so he had to find the collateral. But Avadi didn't sell the Avodah Zarah like Batlov, enough lama pilas. Why is he not going immediately to get his Avodah Zarah? Medeloi kamafni la ema betuli Batla. You would say that what? It's mevoto melet tzricha. That's why we have the first case. Vitana, so say the second case of nafla lema pilas. And everything else is a kol shekain. That what? That the guy is giving up in his mevatals of a Zarah. In that case, I'll tell you, hamanchas, it's right here. Kol emas devi'ina lo. He's been a little lazy because he knows he can immediately, whenever he wants, go pick up his Avodah Zarah. However, the second, you don't chase the robbers, you're giving up by default. To say the case of Gavur listim, I'll tell you no. The case of Gavur listim, I'll tell you as follows. The guy thinks to himself, if it's the guy that stole from me, he's going to continue being Oived as Avodah Zarah. Yisrael shakla ID to the Mayikar, and he knows it's very expensive. Mazbin la Oived Kechavim, and the Oived Kechavim is going to go falachla. However, the last scenario where he totally gave up, and the Lashakla Badayu, you would think it's betuli betlua, and that we're saying tzricha in a scenario where Sidin Lachzer Kemechemes Yeshua that it's not mevotel. So what is this lashon fraktig mar? Masidin Lachzer Kemechemes Yeshua nebetela. Midi Mechemes Yeshua miader hater. They all died. So what are you saying? They're going to come back? Zizak demar hachi kamer. In Masidin Lachzer Harei Kemechemes Yeshua ve'in lebetela. The hainu by Mechemes Yeshua, whether they died or not, is not practical. It doesn't make a difference. Rather, what was the machshava of the goyim while they're running away? If they think they're going to come back, then they're not going to be vatalit. So that's what we're trying to say. We're trying to say if the person thinks that he's going to come back, or whatever reason his cheshbon is that he's going to catch this ganef, then avad it's not mevotel and it's usr. The lamali zaktamar, but lamali lamitl mechames Yeshua. Why are we hitting on dafka to tell us mechames Yeshua to say? Just say, listen, ain't a betela. Why we mention this? The Amar of Yehuda Merav. What is the halacha regarding Yisrael? Shezakav Levena. We discussed the Levena and the Beitza. All those concepts of Ein Adam Oised Davar Scheiner Shaloi. However, when you pick it up, that was the takeaway we had by the Beitza. Is it a gilui that you want the Oivik Chacham to bow down? But Levena it's a Davar Pashut. By picking up, you're showing that you're happy for the Oivik Chacham to bow down. We don't say Ein Adam Oised Davar Scheiner Shaloi, and it's usher. So what's this case? The Yisrael Shezakav Levena Shtachevitz Law. Uboy V'Kechavim B'Shtachevitz Asra. So no law and asra. How do we know that it's asra even though it's not yours? This is the kasha. Ein adam oised davar she'eino shaloi. Amar Lazar ketchilu she'Yisrael damar Rachmana says in the pasuk. V'ashereyem tisru from Beish. When you get there, Yisrael, you got to destroy all the Asherah trees. So it's for Ektimar mechti Yerusha lahem avayseim. It's not the goyim to do with Asherah tree. It belongs to us. And how can they serve the Asherah tree? Ein adam oised davar she'eino shaloi. Ve'ein adam oised davar she'eino shaloi. So Ektimar v'imishum hanach dimikar. You're going to tell me b'betula ba'amasagalu. If you're going to tell me, Zaktamar, you can't bring a raya. Because maybe it was before Bechlal that they served it. So tomorrow, the Mafluchu Yisrael Egel, that what they went, since the Yidden went and ready with Ovid Avodah Zarah, they showed Goliath that Tayu Denichulu Avodah Kachavim. So now the Goyim came and served the Asherah tree. V'chasov Kachavim. You know what they are? They're just a shliach of the Yidden. Shlichusa Didu Avdi. Hachinami Yisrael Shezakaf Leveina. This is the makar of the whole sugar of Leveina. Galia Daita Denichule Avodah Kachavim. V'chi Asa Avodah Kachavim Falachla Shlichusa Didei Kavat. Frak tomorrow. V'dama Be'egel Denichlu. Maybe dafka the ego, but not the Asherah tree. And that's what the Gemara on the cross says in the pasuk. Eila Hecha Yisrael Melamed She'iyu Lelhus Arba. They desired many other desires, not just the ego. Who are then Asherah trees? Ema called Bahadi ego Nisru Mikan Ve'elach Nishtri. Say maybe only at the time of the ego. How do you know specifically this Asherah tree Bechlal is involved? Zok Gemara Man Muchach. Zok Rashi, you can find out in a chanami, Zok Demar. If you know specifically that this tree was a later time, in a chanami, not the Maisa, but you have no way of knowing, and therefore it's Aser, Mitam, Taka, Mitam, Asaf. Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Avodas, Kachavim, Shenechuah, Oivdel. They let go, they literally abandoned Avodah Zarah. So it depends. B'shas, Shaloi, Muteris. Why are you leaving? Elamai, you want to be Vatalit. However, b'shas melchama, where you're running out, you don't have a choice. Then asura, because we say they never really want to be battle, they had to run out. Again, these are like the steps, these little base, whatever we call it, that they put the Avodah Zarah on it. Shemalachim harei elu mutaris. We're going to have to see why. The Gemara is going to question. If the malachim passed by, it is Avodah Zarah. So the Gemara is going to talk about it. Zok the Gemara Mer V'yirmi Aver Abba Merav. Base Nimrod. We all know the Migdal, the tower they did by the Dora Flago. Harehi kavoidis kachavim shinuchu hoivdel b'shas shalom umutter. Even though Avagav Dichi Badrinu Rachmana, who's the one that made the whole Dora Flago, they got themselves scattered and they got themselves mevobel, was their Baruch Shalayla. Still, and therefore you say Kishas Mechamadami. You're right that they were what? They had to leave with the Bahala and everything. And they were very confused. However, they could have came back, and if by not coming back, they're showing that they were mevatel the avodah zarah. Zok the Gemara, I don't understand. Should be aser. On that, Amar Abba Rabbi Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hachi Kamim. Nei Shema Midin Oisa Mishash Malachim Oivrim. Ubalachim Manichim Derzu, and this is what we have to underline. V'Halchim B'Derech Acheres. They're not makbid to go along this route, that there's all these bases of Avodah Zarah. Therefore, we don't even consider it mishamshei Avodah Kechav. Ki Ula Yosef Apisma Pegima, who was damaged his pedestal, his base. Amalav Yudalula Va'ar Rav Shmuel Dami Tavayu Bimus Shenifkam is Aser. So how are you sitting down in this? Va'afilam Andamein Oivdim Shvarim. That's Hanim Evlas Chavim Dezila B'Mosa Lemiflach L'Shvarim. That's the gun. They're not going to serve broken pieces. And then he answered back, the Ula tells Yehuda Amalei, Man, Yoiv, Lon, Ma'afra, the Rabbi Shmuel, who can give us the dust of Rabbi Shmuel? Uma'lilan Einan, so we could put it, some of it in our hours. Rabbi Yochanan, Rish Lakish, Nami Tavayu, Bima Shenifkim is mutter. Va'afil, Man, Dama, Oivin, L'Shram, Hanim, Yehuda, Chavim. Why? Keeping the Pakalai, Zila, B'Mosa, Latula. Avalhani, Shaklu, Lahayu, Maisu, Bimos, and Achrina. And they put a new one, they replaced it easily. So, Vado, we could say it's mutter. Tanya Kavasa de Rabbi Yochanan. That such a case is mutter Reish Lakish. What's the right? Bimus and Nifkam is mutter. However, it depends. If it's a bimus, it's mutter. If it's a mizbeach, where the mama served getchkas to the Avodah Zarah is aser, actually not the true, but until you shatter the roiv of the mizbeach. So Zaktamar hechidam bimus hechidam mizbeach. How do you know if it's considered a bimus or a mizbeach? Rabbi Yaakov Ridam Rabbi Yochanan, it depends. Go look at it. Bimus is Evan Achas. Mizbeach was made out of many stones. Avanim harbe. How do you know when the top of the Nundaladam and Aleph that what that a mizbeach is avanim harbe and it's usher also until it shatters completely or rife? It says in the pasuk Maikra, it says as follows: Besumoi kol avnei mizbeach. When you're talking about when you're making all these avnei mizbeach, it's ka'avnei gir minupatzis. It's like ground chalk stones. And lo yakumu, it says lo yakuma sherim v'chanomim. So Zoktamar, if it's made of what? Full of these stones, lo yakumun, asher mechanamim, ilav yakumun. We're saying that if you're going to do it, if you have all these shattered stones, etc., then lo yakumun asher mechanamim. However, if you don't have it, avad yakumu, so this is what we see clearly, that you're not going to, once it's shattered, completely full of stones, shuv, lo yakuv olav, you're not going to continue to be makravit, and therefore it's permitted. Tana. Learned in a Bryce and Nevat, we're talking about a behema that was served as Avodah Zarah. So if it's shaloi, it's aser. However, b'shalchaveiroi, we're going to see is mutter. Again, ein adam oiseh davar she'ein shaloi. For tomorrow, meaning, never we learn at the sefta. What is a scenario where a person is nevad is animal? Kol she'oiden oiseh, bein b'shoigig, ubein b'mezit, bein b'oinis, bein b'ratzin. So what's the case? Hay oinis hechadami, lav kigoin, danas bein maschaveir v'shtachvelo. We're thinking that you went to, you talked to your friend's animal, and you're mishtachvis. Avad is considered, what do we clearly see? That behemoth's chaver is aser. Amar Amachama loy kegoin shansu avdi kechavim to you v'shtachvel behem toy. They forced you to serve your own animal. The male it's aser because it's yours. D-day. Maskal Zera oines. How could that be? Oines we all know. Oines rachmana patre from the Maisa with the nair the chsiv and nair l'sased dover. Elama Rabba kolay b'chlal loy solved him. Everything everyone's involved in what in the pasuk loy solved him. Where it talks about Avodah Zarah. And then we have the pasuk tells us v'chai bohem. This is what we know regarding the person to be mechal Shabbos, etc. But lo shiyamas behem. Yatzaynus. However, the katzer rachmana it says v'lo sechalu hashem kachi. Dafilu ba'inus it's still aser. Ha ketzad ha bitzin avasya. If it's bitzin, it's mutter. If it's b'fahasya, it's aser. Amal rabban l'rava tani the masayelach. That it depends. If shalai v'cham b'shasek zera is the shmad. That alpha pishak zera batla oisam b'musasais loy batla. On that, Rabbi says no. You can't bring a raya. You want to bring a raya from the shmad? It's not a raya. Why not? Amaluhu. Rabbi says no. Imashum ha. Like the sign. Why? Because aim by Yisrael mama have upalach lo b'ratzayin. Because it's very possible by the shmad. So on the my side of the thousands of yidden, one of them ended up coming a mummer. And Rav Ashi even went further. Rav Ashi, don't even say it's a maybe. Elavadai. There's so many yidden by the shmad. People fell victim and they started mamish oivid avodah zarah. Lavadi Yisrael mumahava ufalach lo b'ratzin. Chizkiah Omar. This is talking about the brises that we discussed. If you can be aser davar she'ein shaloi. Davar she'ein shaloi. Chizkiah Omar kigoin shenisech la'avodas kechavim. We're talking about where the guy went. And he went to his friend's animal. And he was menasich la'avodas chav yaim el karnel. So in such a case where you did a ma'isa, now that you did a ma'isa avado, even though it's your friend's animal, it's usher. However, in a scenario where all you did was bow down to it, ein adam oisu davar she'ein shaloi. Maskor v'adav b'ravo. I never do. I bimas ba'amu b'sharye l'chayra. He didn't really serve anything. All he did was he didn't do any mice in the animal itself. El amarava adav b'ravo no kigon shenisach lo yayin mamish on the animal bein karnel. Earlier it was before the animal. Here it's saying it's on the animal. The ava b'maisa. V'chiyah the asu ulam rebechna apu shalmer mishtachave lebehemas chaveiroi loy asra. However, asa b'maisa it's asra. Amalu Rav Nachman, Fukav Amalei Leula. Go out and tell that what for Tigmar Rav Huna l'shmaitzich bebavel. Dam Rav Huna haisa b'emes chavei revutza b'fnei avodas kechavim. We're talking about your friend's animal. It's lying in front of these guys. Kivan sheshachah b'siman echad. Doesn't make a difference. The trach, as fast as it goes. The point is one pipe. It's asra. So minal on the asra. Elaim, you're going to tell us. We're going to know this from the Kahanim, where we discussed where the pasuk we already saw by the Beis Chunya that already. We already know the Kahanim, the Delmashani Kahanim, we discussed this already. They're the Bnei Deya Ninuhu. Here we're talking about what? Something that's not a Bnei Deya. That we discussed earlier regarding the Cheshmonaim last week, that we saw already over there that they had to put it away. Rav Papa already said he found the pasuk to tell us from Bichilua, they already once it became theirs. That's why it's a problem. We're going to learn from Achaz. We all know, we discussed this again last week regarding Achaz. We discussed what is a Chanu Vikdashanu. We saw this, Mamish, the last daf of last week, Nun Beis. Rather, lakivan da'avu b'maisa. What do we see? Once there's a maisa done, then it's itisru lahu. Hachanami kivan shebamaisa asra. Someone bows down, mamish to the soul of the earth. It doesn't help. Why? Because we discussed this. A person cannot make mountains avodah zarah. However, then if you mamish did that, then it's completely asra, even to headit. However, asan. If you go exchange this for a getchka, then the animal itself becomes asr. The animal itself, you have animal A for the Avodah, the animal itself is asr. But what happens if you take this animal A and go change it for a keli base? What is the halacha? However, chalipin, that's mutarin, because it doesn't continue. It continues. My time in the mandam chalipin asur, and then it continues on the cross. It says in the pasuk, v'ha'isa cherem kamayu. Kol sha'ata mahayim imenet. Anything that generates from it, anything that has part of the chiluk of the Zarah came because of that. Tareu kamayu. V'idach hamakra. If you look at the end of the pasuk, you know what it says? Ki cherem hu. The last word of the pasuk tells us dafka hu. However, v'loi chalipin chalipin. V'idach that says it continues. No, what's the hu coming for? Ahu mivayle lemuta arla b'chalei kerem she'eh machan v'kidish b'temeyan. His lacha is mukudashis regarding Isha. The idach. The one that says hu v'loi chalipin. Arla b'chalei kerem. Like tzichem muta. Why? The havalei avadis kechavim. V'shvius. And therefore shnei ksuvim b'ayin ka'echad. We all know regarding chol shnei ksuvim b'ayin ka'echad. Imelandin. Because why else the two psukim? What's the two psukim? Avodas kechavim hada amrim. Like we just said a second ago. It says in the pasuk kicherem hu. And shvius techsev, it says in the pasuk ki yovel he kodesh tia lachem. To tell us my kodesh typhus is dam of asur. So to a shvius his typhus is dam of asura. So if so my kodesh typhus is dam of v'yotzel chul. So to a shvius typhus dam v'yotzel chul. And Tamalayim says tia. To tell us bavasa tia. Ketzad, how is that? Lokach per shvius. And you bought from it basar. Elu ve'elu, nisabrin b'shvius, you got to throw into the am. They have the halachis. Lokach basar, you don't have to throw it, whatever, but it has the halachis of shvius, it has to get destroyed, the shvius. Then you went and bought basar. Lokach b'basar, and you went with that basar and bought it and exchanged it for dagim. Yatsa basar, the basar is gone. The hainu, yatsa basar means it's lost, it's kedusha of shvius. It got transferred to the next. Nichnusu dagim. B'dagim. Yain, yotzu dagim nechnas yain. Then he bought b'yain shaman, he flipped the b'shaman, yotzu yain, nechnas shaman. Okay, tzad. The point is, achron achroin, nitpas v'shvius. However, the pre itself, atma asr. V'idach, again, kesavar, shnei ksuva and boin ka'echem alamdin. It's the hu, comes the hu, the end of the pasuk. We said, kicherem hu, to tell us that what, li, mutinu to make him. Now we're going to discuss a little got the Gemara till the next summit. Let's see this. Shalu is a Scheiner b'roimi. That's the Scheiner, that's to me the Chachamim in Rome. We're talking about these people, we're going to see all these philosophers, etc. In ein ritzaina ba'avodas kechavim, lama ein mevatlav. The Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't want to have the Zarah. The Rebbeinu Shalom is the most powerful person. The Rebbeinu Shalom can destroy anything. Amru lahen ilu davar shein tzarich la'ilam. Ein echanami. I agree. If it was something that we didn't need to continue the Brias Ha'ilam, by Haya Oivdin, if that's what they would serve, Haya Mevatlai. But what can we do? Harein Oivdin Lachama Lelavan Lekachavim Lamazolis. They serve the things that we need. So Yavid Alam B'nei Hashaitim. The Rebbeinu Shalom shall destroy the world. Amr Lahen Im Kain Yabed Davar Shein Tzarich La'ilam Bay V'Niach Davar Shein Tzarich La'ilam Bay. Okay, I get the point. So go be Mevatel, stuff that we don't need. On that, they answer back, Amr Lahen Punk Fakert. You're going to make it worse. Afan Machzikin Yivdei Oivdin Shalaylu. The people that serve the Chami know what they're going to say. Sharmim, look at us. Teidu shein elahus. Look and see the Cham is the biggest rights of the Zarah. V'ara, you're bowing down to something that the world doesn't need, and it got destroyed. But the Chama can't get destroyed. You know why? Because it's Avodah Zarah. Sharei hein loy bitlu. Therefore, the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't destroy it. Tanu Abanan. Shalu Pilaseifin, the philosophers, asked us Scheiner b'Reini. If the Rebbeinu Shalom in return of his Chachamim neimayin and mevatloi, again quoting the Mishnah, Amalam ilu davar shein oilam tzarich lo yoivdim by harein mevatlo. However, harein oivdim lacham laban lacham lamazolis. Yovid oivdim neshaitim ela oilam kiminag noyik v'shaitim shel kuku asidin litin asedin. And we're going to see a few things, very similar concept, that the Rebbeinu Shalom continues to do it, even though they're not doing the proper thing. Davar acher. Hareisha Gazal Sa Shachitim. Valach Vizar Bekarka. Dinu Batsim Vishting about Shalai Titzmach. So why does it grow? Hello, Ilan Kiminaga Noig, Vailach Vishaitim Shakiko Sitin Litin Sadin. Davar Acher. Hareisha Bal Eishis Chaveroi. Batsim Dinu Shalai Tishaber. Hello, Ilan Kiminaga Noig, Vailach Vishaitim Shakiko Sitin Lisadin. The Hainu Damar Shlakish, the Rebbeinu saying regarding this mamzer, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Leidain L'Rishonim Shaisin Sela Shali Pumbi. Not only they're making it Reisha, we all know, the Nakuda is, they're going to give a Tzel Malakim to this mamzer, the Rebbeinu Shalom Stempel, Elashematrichin Oisi, Umechtimin Oisi Balkarchi. With this mamzer is going to have that I need to get involved, even though what? They're doing Davar Shalai Kaigan. Shal, Pilaisifos Achim Sem Galil, Kosef Teraschim, it says in the Pasuk, Ki Hashem Alekecha, Eish Eichlu, Kel Kana. We're understanding Kana, we all know Kana can mean Kina is a Lashon jealousy, or Pinchas. Kina could be also Kanaim Pagan Bite. So they're understanding it's Mamish Kina like jealous. He says, Mipneiman is Kana Bevdeav, Inim Skana Ba. Why is he Bechal, whether it's even if they're thinking of a jealous or Kina or anything that he's doing, why is the Rebbeinu not upset at the Avodah Zarah itself? Why is he upset at the Oivdim of Avodah Zarah? And he did something wrong. He called his dog the name of his father. Shame Aviv. On that, this philosopher tells me you can't compare it. This Avodah Zarah has b'mamish. Amalai Mari. So why are you saying that has b'mamish? Amalai Pamachas Nafka Gleika Bi Reinu V'Nisraf Kaler Kulov Asab Ezachavim Lai Nisraf. Everything else got destroyed except that. Amalai Emshulcha Mashal Ma'adavadai Mila Melech Basabedam Shesecha Ala Medina Kishaisa Mechamim Mechayim Oisa Oim Amesim Oisa Havaimer. I would tell you in Mechayim Oisa. Amalai Kelabat Tekaresa. How could you compare it again to this? Can you have done it? Again, he said this back, this thing that we saw in the Mishnah. You're right. However, and the well springs in the rivers and the valleys. Like it says in the pasuk, the Rebbeinu was talking. You want me to destroy everything? No, Hashem says the Rebbeinu Shalom. Asif Adam Behema. You want me to destroy the animals and the people? Asif Aifa Shemaim et Gea Yom. V'Machshelus Yisrael V'Geimer. V'Chibnei Yisrael Nichshalom B'Hem Yodim Na'Olam. You're going to tell them whatever the Goyim start doing, I have to destroy. What happens if they start serving you people? La'Adam in Oivdin. Imagine Godel Adar. Suddenly the Goyim start giving them Avodah Zarah. You're going to kill him? V'Chatis Adam Al Pnei Adam V'Geimer Elamai. Again, we're bringing out this concept that the Rebbeinu Shalom is a seed and litin is a din, but we continue with nature. Shal Agrippa Saratzavi, he was the general from Glio, says Ksiba Teraschem. He was the Oivik Kachavim, Rashi says, and he says in the Torah, Ksiba Teraschem, Ki Hashem Elekecha Eish Achluhu, El Kana again. He understood it meant jealousy. Klum Iskana L'Chacham B'Chacham. Who can't you forgive? Most people, if the person's wealthy, can't forgive. Yenim was wealthier or was on his level. But it doesn't bother you, the person who's on a lower level to you. Chacham b'chacham, the giber b'giber, b'asher b'asher. And then he says, you're making a mistake. Kina is not jealousy. Kina is more that you're getting what? Like kanoim. You're getting bothered. The what? Just like an isha. So he says, a person goes and marries another woman. If, I get it. She's more chashuv to me. Then I understand my husband. But she takes it very personal. So too the Rebbeinu Shalom. Amalei Zunin. Zunin, Rashi says he was a Yid. If that was his name, Yisrael Amalei Zunin Abakiva. We know, I'll agree with you, I'm a Yid. There's no such thing as Avodah Zarah. However, I don't understand something. They walk into church, the Azli Kimitari, with broken limbs, they come down healed. My time. How do you understand this? Imagine a person, he always gave without Ba'edim because everyone trusted him. He didn't trust him. We're going to see in a moment that there's no reason for that, but he didn't trust him. So his wife tells him, if this person gets to be called, let's chop it now. Now we have the opportunity. It's easy to deny. Why? Because everyone knows he always gave it Beidim. Because he was never doing the right thing. And he always gave Beidim. Now we should suddenly, so to Kach, the Yisurin. Again, you have to know what this means. The Yisurin are talking. They make a shvua. Mashbiin oison shalai telchu. Mashbiin oison shalai telchu lebiyon ploini v'lei teitzu lebiyon ploini. Ubeshah ploinis v'aydei ploini v'aydei sam ploini. However, kivan shegias manalotze. So they made up for Shchaydish Elul. Atkan is the Yisurim going to happen. Halach zela beis avodas kechavim. In Amr Yisurin. Dinu shalai neitzur. That's where we shouldn't go. Neitzur. They're serving the Avodah Zarah as we're speaking. V'chayzin v'ayim v'chipnei sheshayt zeh asa shalai k'haygen. Anu na'abish v'seinu. V'hainu davar Yehuda Meidich said what does it say in the pasuk? V'chalim roim v'nemanim. The what? Roim b'shlichuson v'nemanim b'shvuasa. Again, this is where we finally could understand B'chlal, how you understand that Amol, they served Avodah Zarah. It wasn't that the taiva was taken away from us. Rather, that the Rebbeinu Shalom made it that we don't see B'chlal Avodah Zarah. But in those days, the reason why they had a taiva is because they saw Avodah Zarah constantly working. That's what I think the taiva was of Amol, and the Rebbeinu Shalom stopped it. Amalei Rabbi Yitzchak Yehuda. Ha'ika beis avodas chavim ba'asrin. D'chim mitzvah amal amotor. When they needed rain, mischazlu b'chalma, this getchka, this Avodah Zarah, came to them in a dream. And he says, Shachtu li gavra, kill a certain person, and the rain's going to come. Maisa mitros. Maisa they went, and Shachtu li gavra v'asi mitro. On that Yehuda says, Amalei hashti yav shechivna. If I would have died, but now I have the opportunity to tell you that what Amirav, Meidich said, what does it say in the pasuk? Hashechalak Hashem elekecha oisam l'chol ha'amim. To tell us that what? Milam shechlikum b'dvarin kedei letardim in ha'olam. How goof the Rebbeinu Shalom made it. Then you should be able to make a mistake. Otherwise, there's no taiva. There's no nisayin b'chlal. So the Rebbeinu Shalom made a nisayin. V'hainu davar shloikash Meidich said, Im la'leitzim hu yelitz. If a person's eletz, he'll make a continuance on him. However, la'novim, if someone is humble, it's not just who, it's yitain. He's going to go yitechein boletame peichen loy. However, boletar, not just peichen loy, rather misayin oisa. The Rebbeinu Shalom goes another step, and he's what? And he's Messiah. Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Now we're going to discuss. It's a little complicated Mishnayos over here. Exactly the concept of the wine press. In order to get a basic understanding, we went through this barichas during the Daf Yomi. We have to understand there are many, many steps how they made the wine press. So on a simple level, what did they have? They had a little pit on a slant that was full of grapes. And they went and they started smashing it. They would literally jump in it. We're going to see Beraglayim. And since it was on a slant, it would go down into a pipe that went into a bar. Right before the bar, there was actually a strainer. We're going to see not only that, it went into the strainer. From the strainer, it went in. And eventually, when the strainer would get a little full from grapes, they went actually another step, took the strainer, went back to the top, and put it back. And they continued the process. And more than that, even by the bar, first they did it with their feet, and then eventually they used gravity, and then they took the kaira. We discussed it, that they would take the kaira and bend it all the way down like that. It would continue the process of making wine. However, to understand Yayin Nesech, this is our discussion, Yayin Nesech only becomes Yayin Nesech when something is called what? Something is called Yayin. Till then, it doesn't have the halacha of Yayin Nesech, which we're going to see extensively in the next few blot, exactly all the halachas of Yayin Nesech. So let's jump right into it. Loichen gas be'uta bin oivdei kechav. The halacha is not a problem to take what from, we're talking about again, this is the first step. The gas be'uta is when they started schlepping down on these grapes. Afa pi shunaitu biyadi. Even though the guy l'chayra is holding onto it, it's still considered mutter. The naisan l'tapuach. The naisan tapuach is the mound. They made a little pile, and then again we said the gravity, and then the beam, and they would schlep it down and destroy it. The Eina Oisa Yayin Nesech. Where does it become Yayin Nesech? It's very important in our Mishnah. It clearly says, Ad Sheyered Labar. Until it goes again through the entire process of we called it like a slide, and then it went to the bottom, through the strainer until it goes into the bar. And even in the bar it continued. From the bar there was sediment. Then they would take like the scum, the top, they would clean it off. And then they would put it into a barrel, and that was almost the final step. And in the barrel, they had, again, the sediment, they would skim it off, and that was the last process. Even today, if you look at wines, a lot of wines have, to a certain degree, cheaper wines, till today have sediment in it. But that was the last process. Everyone agrees by the barrel, after it's in the barrel, after you cleaned it off, there's no shayla. But again, there are many, many steps throughout the process of making wine. Yored labar, once it goes into the bar, mashiv bar aser. Once it's in the bar, if the Oivik Chacham Avodah, we're talking about that he touched it, he made a Yayin Nesech. then it's asur. However, v'hashar is mutter. Zok the Hiluk Gemara, another halacha. Darchen im avodas kechavim begas. There's another halacha regarding, we're going to see, of few points. There's tumah we're going to discuss. There's tumah Eretz Yisrael. B'chlav, you can make something tameh. And there's another halacha we're going to see by Yisrael of misayel dvar avera. So in a simple of mitam tumah, Rashi says there's no problem with tumah because the guy was ready mitam at the second he touched it, and there's no problem misayel dvar avera. So darchen im avodas kechavim bepas. However, of a loy. However, Avodah you cannot. What? You cannot harvest with them. Zok Rashi, why? Because you goyim tumah, and that's a problem. Another halacha, Yisrael. We're talking about an oiva avera. He's making it b'tumah. Shu oisa b'tumah. So loy darchen v'loy baitzrunimai. Again, it's also to be misayeya lidvar avera. However, if a malichin imai chaviyos lagas. However, you could bring it beforehand. You could bring it the barrels again to the wine press. Umevin imai. Menagas, we're talking about empty barrels. There, there's Bechlan no Avera. So Melo, it's Mutter. Nachtoim, a baker shu oisa b'tumah. We're talking about he's doing it with Tamid like a Caleb. Loi loshim v'loi archin imai. The halach is can either shape with it. Of a melichin imai pas lapalti. You can take it to the baker that's baking it. Again, we're going to see that's not a problem. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna is going to say a fascinating chiddush we see in the Gemara over here. He says Yayin. Once there's a flow, once there's a stream, again, it's on a slant. We're picturing it that it's a little on the top. It's much easier to picture mamash like almost like a water slide. It's on top of the slide. Is this part? In reality, it's not. It's much more of a box with a tiny slant. But the concept is once there's a flow, once these yain continue going down, Zok Rav Huna, it becomes yain nesach. I say yain nesach. Fact tomorrow. Is this really true? That Rav Huna, once there's a flow, we have a mefarish in the Mishnah. Our Mishnah tells us it's not. And now we're understanding very clearly once it's on the tepuach, once it's on the mound, there's already a flow. You already got the whole wine press going. Rav Huna, you're telling me it's Nesach beforehand? And my answer is no. Rav Huna, no, everyone's going to tell you Begas Pikuko Malaya, where it's fully loaded, when it's stuffed. There's no flow. Again, even to everyone understands, to make a flow, even today when you have a clog sink, what do? You have to unclog it a tiny bit, and suddenly there's a flow. But when something's very stuffed up, everything is stuffy, and in the middle is no flow, and that's why we're saying it's mutter. Frank Nemar Tosh Mavein, say clearly says until it goes where? Into the pit. And we're thinking it's running down the slide. So if it's going down the slide, it's going down into the bar, it's flowing heavily. Again, Rav Huna is going to tell you, Chanami begas kuka malaya. Tashma, Yara lebar, Masha bebar aser, Vashar mutter. Oh, again, we clearly see over there where it tells us that the shar is mutter. L'chayra, once it started going down, it's nimshach. And it says whatever's in the gas, whatever's in the wine press is mutter. Rav Huna loy kasha, kan, b'mishnah rishayna, which we're going to see, kan, b'mishnah achrayna. There we're going to say this halacha. The Tanya, it says b'rishayna ayimrim. Bedad, we're going to see the bedad, the ein beitzrin, which is the base for the bedad, in beitzrin, im oive kacham begas, why shall also ligram to melachun shbeit Yisrael. The ein darchen, im Yisrael sha'isa, this is the dalid, im Yisrael sha'isa piraisa b'tumah sha'asa l'sayeya, l'dvar aver, aval darchen, over here clearly says darchen, that once, im oive kacham begas, once he started doing it, there's no problem of tumah, because he made it tumah, it's flowing, v'lei chashina l'darvuna. So it's clearly not like Rav Huna, because he says once it starts to what? To be Moshech, once it's flowing, it's Aser. Then Chazur Laim, and then they said no, which is Shitas Rav Huna. Dalet, Beis, Dalet, Debat, Ein Darchen, Em Oived Kechavim. Not Ein Beitzen, it says Ein Darchen, Em Oived Kechavim. You know why? Pump Fakert, Meshum de Rav Huna. Vein Beitzrin, one Nunvava Maralef, the top of Nunvava Maralef, Vein Beitzrin. Em Yisrael, Sha'aitze Piraisa Betuma, V'kol Shekain. She'ain darchen of a beitzim cham begas. Why? She'mutter. Here we changed the halach. We thought it's aser. Now we're saying it's mutter ligrim tumah l'chulin shbeit Yisrael. Memele we can understand shitas Rav Huna. Zok Gemara tells us ve'ein oisin yain nesach. Mishnah tells us the only time comes yain nesach chiyer labar. In fact, the Gemara of Tanya yain only becomes a problem is mishi yikfe, which is the next madrega, which is even when the wine goes into the bar. We said it starts settling in the bar, then the sediments and everything, all the zachin start rising, and then you take like a ruler, you take something, and we discuss this in Bava Basra, and then you go and you skim it off. So clearly it's not a problem. Rabbi like Kasha. Ha Rebbe Kiva that's going to tell us that it's not a problem till Mashiach. Ha Rabban, which is our Mishnah, the Tnan, Yain is Mashiach Labar. Mamash Mishnah Rebbe Kiva Mashiach. Ibailu, keep the bar, keep the chavis. Like we said in the Mishnah, is many madregas, but the last madrega is it happens twice. The scum rising once in the bar, and then you put it into a barrel, and even in the barrel, which is the last step, you have it rising. So the shaila is when Rebbe Kiva is discussing Yain Mashiach, is it mamash on the next madrega? Wow, all the way by the last case. Tashma, then we're going to see that it's even earlier. Avodah bechavis, once it's in the chavis, it's a problem. The Tani Yaim Shiik v'afu pishakav v'koyla min hagas ha'oyoyna u'minatzina v'shoysa. We clearly were saying over there the halach is you could take it from the basin that was on top. There was a basin. Minatzina v'shoysa is not a problem. This is discussing the halachas of meiser. The halachas of meiser is not a problem. Shmami no, but what do we see? What are we discussing? Rashi says we're talking about a gmar malach le'inyan meiser. The halach of meiser is it only becomes aser when le'inyan aray. The halacha is by gmar malacha you continue doing achilas aray. Shmami no. What do we see clearly? Keep it the bar kamrinon. Why? Because we're talking about the gas. Zok Rashi di bechaviyos. If we're talking about chaviyos, ma inyana it's all a gas. Elamai. I mean it's shmami no that we're talking about the bar, but Avodah Reb Kiva would agree that by the barrel it's aser. Vatani fraktamar vatani abzid. B'dereb Oishia Yayin is Mishayered Labar v'Yikvin. Rabbi Kiva here says Mishayishle b'Chavias when you start pouring into the barrels, which is the next step. So how can you tell me it means Yayin Shemikvin a bar? Mar says in Echanam you have to read it. Tertzi you change it to amend it, make an amendment, addendum almost, and you change it to what? Tertzi Nam L'Hakamaisa Hachi. This is how you read it. Yayin Mishayered Labar v'Yikvin. Rabbi Kiva is the one who says, "Frak demar v'elamasnis dektani and oisi yayin nesech." Shiur labar comes out the three shittas we're coming out with. Leima plus a tanai comes out we have three tanaim. One is our Mishnah with Shiur labar. Then we have shittas rabbanim Mashiach v'bar, and then we have Rabbi Kiva, which is the next madriga pouring into the barrel. Mar says no. Lloyd, that was discussing the shittas are discussing meiser. Here we're discussing yayin nesech. Shani yayin nesech. However, you're right. The meiser we either have only the two shittas, Rabbanan and Rekiba. Well, a Rava, when Vavam Beis Rava, the Loishani late. Rava asked the Shaila from what? From meiser and Yayin. What did he start telling us? Ha Rabbi Kiva, ha Rabbanan. What do you mean? Answer simple. Yayin Esech is much more chomer. Shmukim like it lost it tonight. You're right. You're gonna have to say it comes out. There are three different shittas. Again, Mishiach labar, Mishiach v'lechavis, and what? The third shitta of Rabbi Kiva is Mishiach lechavios when you start pouring into the barrels. The Mishnah tells us, Mashabar Aser Basharmot. Amr Avuna Leshana Leshalehechzer Garkutani Lagas. Garkutani Lagas means, what we're talking about, Garkutani again, is this what? Is the strainer. So we said, again, let's try to picture like a water slide. On top is the mound and everything starts flowing down. There's a pit. However, right before the pit, there was a strainer. And in the strainer, that was going to the bar. However, eventually, after a certain amount of time, you took all the contents of the strainer, because it was still full. Every time, whenever you want to juice out something, you constantly do it over and over to get all the juice out. So you took the contents of the strainer, went back to the top of the gat, and put it back by the mound, etc., to recycle the process. So it says, you know where it's Bashar Motel Leishanu L'Shalei Garkusni Lagas. But once you return it, the Garkusni Lagas is Asr. Even whatever is in the gas, because we're thinking that became yayin nesech the strainer. This is what's coming out. Everything in the strainer became yayin nesech. So you're taking yayin nesech and putting it in again. Bin b'mino. We're not going to discuss this. The whole halach is a bin b'mino. Why is not mevatel b'roif? Because the concept bin b'mino is not mevatel. So hechzer garkun el gasas. Zaktumar gargusni gufa. What itself is the contents in the strainer? What's the problem with that? How's that yayin nesech? B'maika mitzra. You know what it's nitzra? B'nitzak. Nitzak is like a zarim, like a stream. We're trying to say it's called a kiluach. Kiluach hayoyred. We're understanding the way is you have the strainer on top of the bar, and when you're pouring it constantly, it's almost like electricity, like water. Water is a current. So if you imagine the pit had electricity in it. The second you start pouring it, suddenly it connects, and since it's a connector, chibur kiluach, it becomes yayin esech. Shma mino. What do we clearly see? Nitzach chibur. That the halacha is it makes it nitzach chibur. The fraktamari. What do you mean? Rashi says the kasha is shmamina nitzachibur. We're going to see now ayin beis omen beis is a machlokes. So why don't we pull out a raya? How can you tell me we could come out with the shittas right here? Shmamina nitzachibur. My answer is no. You know why it's not? You know why you can't bring it a raya? Over there, the sugi over there we're talking about, where it talks about, over there is a whole separate shiloh regarding the funnel. Here we're discussing the strainer, but the exact same concept is as follows. We were understanding that you picture there's a strainer on top of the bar. There's no connection whatsoever except one thing, the streamline, basically the Zarah. By pouring, eventually it goes so fast that the contents of the bar are connected to the contents in the strainer by a what? By a Zarah. And then we're answering no. Rather, what we're discussing is there's so much yayin that it wasn't just a Zarah. It was caught up completely that what? That the strainer itself was almost soaked into the bar itself. It was in it. Because there was so much water. If you think about it, if you have a strainer, let's say a foot on top of a pit, the pit, that's is very high. However, there's only contents of the pit all the way in the bottom, but eventually, by keep filling up the water, or wine over here, eventually, what happens, they connect physically, and that's why it becomes Yayin Nesach. However, again, we're not going to get into, Tosfos has a whole marach over here. How do you understand, B'chlal, the gat itself should be usher? We're understanding, once you tell us that the stream itself is becoming connected, for Tosfos, I understand, if you look at the entire picture at one time, you see all the way from, again, we're picturing like a slide, all the way from the top of the yayin, all the way into the strainer, into the bar, everything is one long zarem, one long kiloch. Why is it not usher? Tosfos says, very fascinating, Tosfos says it's really shtei zirumim, which means to say is, it goes, you're right, it's the top of the slide, goes into the strainer, but the strainer, the holes are on the sides of Tosfos. So since on the side it goes in, and then there's holes on the side that makes another zarem, Tosfos in the kasha. There's Tosfos in the Amina when he's at in the Gemara's kasha, not Tosfos in the Amina. In the Gemara's kasha makes it two different zeroms, and that doesn't work. But it comes out, the Maskanas Gemara, what it needs a little beer is, Maskanas Gemara is that it's one zarem. We're not saying it's coming from the sides, and we're back to, I don't understand, l'chayra, even the top, the gat, should be usher, even without taking the contents of the strainer and putting it back in. Again, it's a very complicated tzarech beer. We're going to see a Maisa, there was a child, the ton of it, it's chambashis. Again, you have to know why 6 years old, why B'chlal. They're testing this kid. He was 6 years old, he was a big Tabachacham, he knew the Masechet cold. The ton of his chambashishni. Bo, and they asked him a child to trick it, really to test him. We all know that Avodah Chacham be'etzim is aser. But Bo, we know it's aser, but they wanted to test him. Amalahu, not a problem. What do you mean? Well, come and ask to be all day, he's doing yayin nesach. How can you tell me it's mutter? He answers the eternally all day where we tie his hands. Become an asab regel. Nisach regel, loshme nisach. Therefore, it's mutter. Mamash, a case where Yisrael and a guy, again, they were doing this yayin nesach. However, the hands were tied. They were doing it beregel. B'shaya Shmuel waited plus a wriggly. We're going to see, he waited he wanted to go through the Yom Tov where he could find more Rabbanim to come out with this psak. But we don't know what his psak was. My timer, you're going to tell me that what he be'etzim held, the mashkachana, tana da asar, he be'etzim wanted to hold this asar. So he was looking for a shita that says tana da asar, kirab nasan. In such a case, to tell us it's asar kirab nasan, then it's rina fila ba'na. Then it should be asim ba'na. What's this kirab nasan that we're talking about? Over here, it should say even it should be asar ba'na. The Tanya, when the top of the Zainam and Aleph, Madadoi, we're talking about a guy. He comes to a barrel, and the way he wanted to see how much content is in there, he put his hand. He knows his hand is, let's say, 12 inches. He puts it in. I guess he can see the mark. Like that, he'll know exactly how much. The Tanya, Madadoi, Bein Biyad, Bein Baragel, whether he used his hand or his foot. Yemacher clearly says it has to get sold. Why? Because he wasn't miskaven l'yayin nesach. His point was to measure it. Reb Nassim, it depends. Biyad is aser, Beregel is mutter. So what are you going to try to say? Maybe what happened over here was Shmuel was waiting to see if anyone held like Reb Nassim that it's aser. And then we're going to say it can be. Imadav Reb Nassim is dafka biyad, Beregel miyamer. Here we're having a shayla over here. Our sug is Beregel. They tied up this yid's guy's hands. Eladi mishkachana tana de sharei. Rather, he was looking for someone to be matter it. Kereb Shimon. Why Reb Shimon held if a person touches the wine, as long as it doesn't have kavanah, for yayin nesach, like our case where he's measuring, etc., it's not a problem. Ishari afilu b'shtiyah. So he wanted to see if anyone, would say like Reb Shimon like that. He was more confident to come out with the psak. He's going down the tree. He's coming down with the lulav. Now, bahadit the kanachis, while he's going down, naga bereisha the lulav bechamra. So here the lashon of the Gemara is very clear, which is Shittas Rashi, is that the lulav itself touched the wine. However, if you look towards the bottom of the Taisus, Hachi Garcinon, he brings down from the Bein Tam, Girsas Bein Chanana, V'Hochas G'daylos, in the Ga'onim, that Avodah de Logoras Bereisha de Luvya Elanoga B'Chamra. Because Taisus held if it's going through the lulav, it's not a problem, only if you touch it with your hand, and he had a different Gersa. Because they question this in Rashi. How can you understand if you touch it with the lulav? It should be us, or again, we're not going to go into it. We're going to see it on the base. We're going to have to say the same machlekes. If he touched it be a dime, or he touched it a day acher, it's a big machlekes, Scheiner, Rashi, Taisus, etc. The kanachas, but we're going to learn the naga b'reish luvi b'chamra. The Gemara's lashon shalei b'kavana sharyeh. So shalei b'kavana. So sharyeh Rav lezavune loy v'kachavim. He held his mutter to sell it. Amalei of Kana Rav Asi Rav Amar Dama Tinik ben Yoimai who I see I nesach. Now Tinik ben Yoimai, everyone agrees, has no das. Afal Pikain, even without das, he could make it into Yain Nesach. So too over here, very nice. This person's going down the palm tree, and he doesn't have the das to make a Yain Nesach. Why is it different than a Tinik ben Yoimai? Amalahu, and then he answers, Amadami, I know, Bishtia. I know me, Amri. My whole time I want to say that Tinik ben Yoimai is also Dafka Bishtia. However, by now it's mutter. Gufa, let's see this. Amar Rav Tinik ben Yoimai, I say Yain Nesach. Eser, Rav Tinik ben Rav. We're going to tell me the Rav holds Tinik ben Yoimai makes a Yain Nesach. Halakech avodim min ha'oivdei kechavim. Shemol v'loi tovlu. We're talking about avodim from their fathers were what? They did a bris milah. However, they weren't typing. We're going to see, we're going to go like the Shitas, if he didn't do a tefillah, you're goy gomer. Now, halakech avodim is much worse than what? In the second case. We're going to see the shaka b'tario. V'chein pnei hashvachos. Pnei hashvachos, we're going to see regarding Avodah Zarah has a better mila. That they're brought up in a place where there's no Avodah Zarah. Because the Gemara is going to question this. V'chein pnei hashvachos shemalav v'loi tavlu. The halacha is rukan, the raikon, the spit. Umidrasan, bishuk. And the point that says even bishuk, which is a rishus or rabbin, which is a vadei, sok, which is a rabbin, usually is tahar. Here we're saying tummy because it's a vadei. I want to say tahar. Now, Yehuda, regarding the wines, g'daylim oisi yain nesach. K'tanim ein oisi yain nesach. So what is g'daylim? What are k'tanim? G'daylim k'tanim. G'daylim is yodim t'eva v'zchav. U'mishamshel. K'tanim ein yodim t'eva v'zchav u'mishamshel. However, what are we pulling out? At any rate, what do we see? K'tanim miyas. G'daylim in, k'tanim loy. But what's going on? You, Rav, just told us Tinik ben Yoimai oisi yain nesach. Tergamon, no, it's going on the Bnei Shvachos. The second case, the Bnei Shvachos, is what we're discussing on, that everyone could agree is much better. Oh, V'chein Karma, what are you telling me? That it's going on the Bnei Shvachos? It says V'chein. Whenever it says V'chein, it's going on both. V'chein, Bnei Shvachos, Elokech Avodah. V'chein Karma, no, that's the Chein is only going on a Rukun and Midrasan, that it's Tameh. Hanich Laman Dama Tameh. That's going to work. Laman Dama Tameh. Laman Dama Tar, Michael Lemeimer. The Haina, like I just explained. Laman Dama Tar. You have to understand that Bnei Shvachos is much more what? Much more of a chiddush to say that something will be Tameh. So Madach, if you tell them the Man Dama Tameh, if Madach the Bnei Shvachos, which are brought up in a house where there's no Avodah Zarah, Afal Pikein it's Tameh, Kol Shekein Elokech Avodim. So when Michael Lemeimer, Kamashmal law, no, the Kamashmal is not there. Kamashmal the other way around. That Avodim is doing the Bnei Shvachos. Ma Bnei Shvachos Malav Tavlu. Who does see Nesach? But the Chiddush is in a scenario Malav Tavlu where they didn't do the Tefillah loy, so to Af Avodim came. What would you think otherwise? Well, Fukim and Rav Nachman and Mashmol, Menachem and Mashmol. Halakeach Avodim and Oivdik Chavim Af B'Shemalav Tavlu see Nesach until when? Acha Tishka Avodim Chacham Piyam. We're going to see that means the 12 months. We're going to see that in a moment. Kamash V'lo, and we don't hold like this. They're like. So let's see Rav Nachman. Gufa. Rav Nachman Amashmol Lekech Avodim and V'chavim Al Pishemol V'Tavlo Yisei Nesach. Acha Tishka V'Tchavim Piyam. That's kind that we just quoted. V'kama. How long? Am Yishom and Levi 12 months. Achnim is a Chaydesh. After 12 months, he stops thinking about the Avodah. He stops getting used to it. It's almost like Hergel. Hey, so Rav Nachman, you tell me 12 months. We learned over here, Lakech Avodim and Oidich Cham Shemol V'Loi Tavlu. Mamish is price we saw earlier. V'chein Bnei Hashvachos Shemol V'Loi Tavlu. We just saw Raikin and Midrasa and Bishuk. It's Tameh. Someone say Ba'amir Latar. Now Yeina G'Doylem Oisi Yain Nesach Tanim Ein Oisi Yain Nesach. One of the top of Zayin base. And Elohim Doylem Elohim Tanim Doylem Sheyodim V'Tuva V'Zchav M'Shamshah Tanim Shein Yodim V'Tuva V'Zchav M'Shamshah. But what do we see? At any rate, what are we pulling out of this extensive brisa? Ktani Mias Malu V'Loi Tavlu in. However, Malu V'Tavlu lie. You don't have to wait 12 months. But then you just tell me, even a scenario Malu V'Tavlu, you have to wait 12 months. Tergama again, like we just did on Amud Aleph. Tergama, no, it's going to be Nishvachas. Oh, the Chen Tani. No, the Chen is going to reckon Midrasa. Again, the exact same Kash we saw on Amud Aleph. Nichel man damatame, elaman damatame kelamimer. Hakamash from the other way around. Avodim dum the Nishvachas. Ma Nishvachas. Doilem hu de Yaisi Yanesach Tanim Yanesach. So to Avodim Nami Doilem Yanesach Tanim Yanesach. La Fuke who? Who do you think otherwise? La Fuke Midirav. What do we saw Rav and Amud Aleph? Rav and Amud Aleph says that what? Rav. Tinik ben Yaimai. I say Yain Nesach. The Kamash Malon is not like Rav. Rather, Kamash Malon, the halach is it does not become Yain Nesach. Avodah. We're going to see a Maisa that will have it b'Mechuzah. And we're going to see Mechuzah. We're going to see in a moment. We're going to see it on Nunches Amud Aleph. Mechuzah wasn't either the grace of Talmidei Chachamim. We're going to see this by Tverya. Lahu Mechuzah. Asay v'chavim. Ay lechanusa d'Yisrael. A guy walks up to the shopkeeper and says, "Can I get a little wine? Amalu islu chamar lezavuni. You have any wine to sell me?" He tells him with a straight face, "Nope, I don't have any wine left." Amalu loy. Havi Yosef Chamar. He turns. He's on the way out. He's leaving the store. What does he see? He bumps into a wine barrel. So he got very upset. Havi Yosef Chamar bedavli. He sees wine in a bucket. Shadu b'yadei. He takes his hand with shichshik. We're going to see shichshik is like the lashon agitate, to mix it. That's what makes a yain nesach. So shichshik bay, and we're thinking that he's doing it nothing to do with Avodah Zarah. He doesn't have a hamin of Avodah Zarah. This is the hamin. We're going to see the maskana. It's going to come out that Adarabah, he wants to get back at the yid. He's upset at the yid for lying to him, but he says, "What's going on? Amalu haylav chamru, you're lying to me." However, the yid got very nervous. He quickly takes the barrel and says, "No, puts it in the big cask." He takes a shakla berische very angrily. Rashi says, "Climb like tishtavan, don't drink from it." And shad yiladana. Now he made it much worse. He put it into the massive barrel. So now what is the halacha? So shari rav lizavune. We're going to see not to drink it, but to sell like chavim. If like a Ravuna Ber Nachman, nafki shipur. So what happened? They held it was usher. Nafki shipur the Rava. However, they said it's mutter v'sharu. Nafki shipure the Rav Huna Ber Nachman v'ashri. Again, Rashi explains they weren't in the city with him to argue with him. It was only later they heard he's pulling out the shofars, giving all these proclamations, saying all the halachas. They went and also started putting all these posters in all the shul what the halacha is. Ikla Amaisa Rashi says it was la'achazman, and we're going to see Abaya in a moment. Nachmeni, we're going to see this on Nunches over here on top of Nunches Amud Aleph, just to explain Rashi's matzah with already with Nachmeni, with Abaya. Who is Nachmeni? Nachmeni was definitely Abaya. However, there are many shitas exactly. Is Abaya's name Abaya, or is Abaya's name Nachmeni? Because Abaya was clearly a Yosem, and Rabbi Nachmeni actually took care of him. So the Shaila, someone to say his name was really something else, Nachmeni. He was talking to his nephew, and his name was Nachmeni, but he would call him Abaya, my father, because since it was his nephew and had the same name as his father, he called him Abaya. My father, someone to say they had it from the Psukim of Shebecha Yerucham Yasoim, Abaya, the acronym. However, some on a simple level say that they called him Abaya for his covet, or it was Rabbi Nachmeni, and he was a Yosef. Okay, so let's see. However, he was very embarrassed. So, because we're going to see that Abaya and Nachmeni slugged him up. So, Rabbi tells the Shamish, try Gali, close the doors. I have a big sugi. I have to prepare a share. I don't have time right now. The Gabbai didn't think Rav Huna is going to knock on the door. He didn't think he's not going to, for Rav Huna is not going to do it. He's going to let him in. Rav Huna gives a knock. So he lets him in. What is the halacha on this scenario that we just discussed? What do you mean? And that Rava responds, did I really say that the entire sale he could do, he has to make a cheshbon and lose that wine? However, Rashi says very fascinating. It's hard for me to understand. Rashi says, what, he didn't say the emes? He didn't say the emes because he was embarrassed. He took him at the G'dayla Adar. Rashi says this, little tzarech beer to me, mishum kesufa kama hachi av ilu kula shari. Sounds like to a certain degree he wasn't saying the emes. But that's how Rashi says. Amar Rava ki asa l'pumdisa. Amar Rava ki asa l'pumdisa ik akfa Nachmeni. This is what Rava is saying. What shot that Rava was chayzer? Because what happened was Nachmeni, again, Nachmeni is Abaya, whatever the reason is. Abaya, shmaitzu masnisa d'aser. Shmaitzu the hu of da. Davim in our doi, v'asa shmo b'tevarya. V'asa davim in our doi, v'asa shmo b'tevarya, v'asa shmo b'tevarya, v'asa b'yechin. V'amila, l'fi she'im b'nei Torah. Because they're not b'nei Torah, but they're yasid them. V'amili tverim in our doi, b'nei Torah. Oh, the mechuzah where the ma'isa with Rava was. You're going to tell me they work right at tzadikim? B'nei Torah. So that's why he learned there was us from the Shmaitza. Masnisa, the Agdamin. Agdamin, Rashi's Mazda, these are the people, the inspectors that will check the weights. Even today, you go to the gas station, they come once in a while and make surprise things. But more than that, they would also taste it. They became the Mumchim, Rashi says, very fascinated. They would start tasting wine, the Toyim Ayayin, and they learned how to make deals. They got their fingers sticky in business. So these the Agdamin, Oivik Chavim. Shekadach b'menekes v'hela. So he takes a little straw, he starts sucking it. Oishetom in a kais. Where he takes a little wine, tastes a little, and he puts it right back the rest. V'chzir l'chavis. In Zarah Maisa, with this taco, this argument. V'ashro. My love. Isn't it right? My love. Bahana. Hagam. L'chayr. He wasn't having kavanah for yain nesach. So we clearly see that even if you don't have kavanah, makes yain nesach. Lo yus b'shtia. He hachi. Listening yemacher. It shouldn't say that. It should say also shayikasala. Kediktani seifa. More than it says chayrim. Who's a chayrim? Rashi says it's a mashugah. Mamash a mashugana. Ba'amaribis. Ma'alas shalei b'kavanah. So on, I guess, autistic. He puts his hand to chavetz. The kasava shel shemini. There, he mamash to the shemen, so has nothing to do with yain nesach. V'nimtza shel yain zera ma'asav amri yimacher. You see over there yimacher, so why do you say over here yimacher? Tiyufta, the Rava, tiyufta. It's taka tiyufta, and that's why Rava was chayser. Rabbi Yechanan ben Arzov, Rabbi Yosef ben Aroi, have a Yosef v'kushasi chamer. The middle, drinking wine. Asahu Gavra, the waiter passed by. For whatever reason, they thought, I guess he had a keep on. They thought he was Yid. Amr le, Sash Kinan, go serve us some yayin. Lebasar, the Rama lekise. Lemaisa, after he poured the cup, he gloi milsa daiv kachavim. Who, I guess they realized that he wasn't a Yid. Chad asa fila banat. Chad shari, mamash the other extreme fila b'shtia. Amr b'shuva levi. Man da asa shaper asa man da shari shaper shari. Man da asa, one who hollows asa meima amar. Zok Rashi, the guy thinks to himself, this guy waiter says to himself, Sanka daited their abana kihana shicher koshasi. They're going to drink a beer. Beer was drinks that the peasants drank. They're drinking wine. Elavadai hachamru v'naschen diffri adas lemichaparai medayayin nesach. However, man, the shari shaper shari. You know why? Meima amar. The guy tells himself, Sanka daited their abana kihani chamer koshasi. Can be it's wine. V'araya v'amar lay. They're going to tell me litidita tashkina. They know the halachas. Elavadai elamai. For whatever reason, they're drinking shichra the koshasu. The light naschen. You see if it's wine and beer. No, Mar says Belayla, we're talking about it was nighttime. Wine has a sharp sense of smell. Bechatza, it's new wine that yain chadash and then leireach. So Rashi doesn't have a smell. Either way, he picked it up with the handle. That's what we're thinking. It's like a cup, almost like a ladle, like soup. That's what we're thinking. How they gave it to him. The Kamayrik Aruke, he bechlal, it wasn't that he took a ladle, rather he took mamash like a beer and poured it with the bottle. And what is that? And therefore this is taka pshat in the man Amar, the shari. It's a little interesting pshat, a little interesting lashon. Mitzachah means to dilute it in those days. We all know the wine was very heavy. You had to dilute it. The Gemara is going to question, why are we using a fancy lashon of the psukim shemesachai? But he diluted it. Say use the lashon of Gemara. I'm coming from the psukim. Like it says regarding the isha when she's preparing a meal. Tavcha tivcha, she slaughters her meat, and mascha yena, and she dilutes the wine. You just stick with the lashon of Gemara. So what is takadav lachamai? Amalei aser. You know why it's aser? I didn't touch it. Gzeira mishum lech. I'm reading the zero. We tell the Nazir, run away, stay away from this. Sechar, go around. Lekamra leitikra. Don't go into the vineyard. Don't think you're Eibechacham. Stay away. Rabbi Yirmiyah ikra l'safta. Safta was the name of a place. Chazach Hamra. The Mazgi Eibechacham. He saw the taka, they would pour wine of them. The Ishti Sominei. V'asalu, again, the same reason. Mishum lech. Amen Nazir schar lekamra leitikra. Itmanam yariyach navamel amar vasim yariyach yain shemizga v'cham maser. Again, same reason. Mishum lech. Amen Nazir schar lekamra leitikra. Zokt the heilige Gemara. Reish Lakish ikul lebatzra. Right away, Rashi says batzra. He thought it was the Shevet Reuven and Eretz Yisrael, and therefore we're talking about lochas of meiser and Chaim meiser. Chazi Yisrael the ka'achel peirit the loy meiser. Vasalu again it was a Hami. He made a mistake. He thought it was an Eretz Yisrael. That was one thing. Another thing he saw was Chayim Maya. The Sagdu loy v'chavim. He saw that they were worshiping the rivers. V'shas Yisrael v'af became the Yidden were drinking vasalu. Also, the Kameder Rabbi Yechanan Amalei. While you're still wearing your clothing, run back and retract what you said. Don't even sit for a moment. Zil Hadar Butzer is not Bitzra. It's not the place that we thought in Eretz Yisrael, Shevet Reuven. Rather, it was Chutz La'aretz. And Chutz La'aretz and Achai Meiser. Lav Hainu Bitzra. What's with the second halacha? Ma'im Shal Rabim Ein Esarin. Why? Because Rabbi Yechon Tamei on the top of Nun Tesum at Aleph. Dam Rabbi Yechon the Shum Shimon Yetzadak Ma'im Shal Rabim. We discussed this many times. Ein Esarin from the pasuk. Allah Har Makvayim. Zaktim right away the Mar interjects. So you're going to make a diak. Ha Diyachid. It would be Nesarin. So it's only because Ma'im Shal Rabim Ein Esarin. We have the problem of Har Makvayis. Ha Diyachid Nesarin. But typically we learned to read the Har Makvayis. Like Tzricha, the Tashlinu Galos, a wave that came and it was detached from the river. Saif. Why is it different than Avnei Hashin and Daldal Ninu? We discussed that massive machlekes over there. And over there we saw, and it should come out, if so, to Stayim, to Rabbi Yechon Al Masus, and we blind Shver. What is Rabbi Yechon Shita? We have a Makar. Mar answers like Tzricha, the Tefchina Biyadei. The whole Shiloh we discussed with the Avnei Har was when there was no Maisi Adayim. Once we discussed with the guy himself, there was no Daldal Ba'atzmai, there Avada in a scenario we did it be Adayim. There's no Shiloh, it's us. Rab Chia bar Abba Ikla Legavla. Gavla is also a name of a place. Chaza, we're going to see a few things he saw. 3 things. Chaza, first of all, he saw Bnei Yisrael. They were pregnant from what? From husband. They didn't do a bris milah. They did a bris milah. However, they didn't do a tefillah. We're going to see what the halacha of the kids are. Chaza Chamra. They must go to Chum Shas Yisrael. And Chaza Turma saw the Shaklu of the Chum. Turma is like beans, like almost like a stew. You cook it for a while. The Chum will bake it. Achli Yisrael. We should have a problem. We're going to see Bishal Akum, maybe Gzeirais. We'll go into that. Say, and he said as follows. Come out with these halachas. First of all, the Hachreis and tell them as follows. Abneyam Shem Amzer. Regarding halacha number 1. Va'yenon regarding the wine Mishum Yain Nesach. Val Tormason is Mishum Bishula of the Chav. Zok Demar Mishum She'ein Bnei Torah. Rashi says, what's the name of the Torah? Is going on the beans. Since it's not Bnei Torah, we are going to see you have the Gzeira Bnei Seir. Al Bneyam Shem Amzer Rabbi Yechon Tamei Dam Rabbi Yechon Alaylam in a Ger She'amal V'yitfol. V'kivin Lo Tav Lo V'chavimu. That's why the problem, why it's considered it's a mamzer. Second halacha, again, like we saw, it's just an extra gzeira on top of it. What about the beans? Why the fish ain't of Neitayr? Zok tomorrow, we make a diak. Time of them Neitayr. Affect tomorrow. Neitayr, you're going to tell me Shari V'Amar Rav Shmuel, Bar Rav Yitzchak, Amar Rav Kol Shenachol Kamais Shu Chai. Ein boy mishum b'shula evdik kachavim. However, you're going to tell me the chayr is no problem. Shul comes. So what's the problem? Our answer is Rabbi Yechanan Kiachlish Nesvir Leidam Rishmol by Rabbi Yitzchak Merav Kol Scheiner Elo Shulchan Shemalach Lapas Place a pass. Ein boy mishum b'shula evdik kachavim. And these beans, Tormas, they wouldn't need a chai, and they wouldn't need a shulchan malachim. However, therefore, time in them Bnei Torah. However, Bnei Torah attack would be permitted. Shari. So what exactly this anovim lagas? Rashi Bechlal, if you look at Rashi, there's no Rashi going on. Rashi Bechlal does not talk about what is das halacha anovim lagas. However, Taisus in the bottom, Mamish in the bottom brings down Rishbam Pirish, Vizel L'Shoina, the whole Shaila is Dr. Rishbam. On a simple level, can these goyim transport the Bechlal, these grapes, to what? To the gas, to the wine press? What's the problem? The problem is, while the schlepping is very common, while it's on his shoulders, wherever it is, for wine, for juice to come out, that's just why while it's transporting. It's obvious it comes out. So this would be the shiloh. Maybe you're going to touch it. And the whole shiloh would be, since you touch it, Avodah, there's no real shot to make it all. So that's our Mishnah, but maybe it's a Gzeira. That's the shiloh, the Gemara, according to the Rishbam. On a simple level, because your bites are not nice and sound like lichin lagas. Do we say vayayin mizalef umatil nice vegas? No, mi choshev. That's a simple level. If it's nasach b'magal, that's how Rishbam wants to learn it. However, the Rav Yishanim arguing the Rishbam, they say no, it's obvious, it's mutter, there's no shiloh. Rather, b'chlal, the shiloh is if you could empty the grapes into the basin itself. There, now the basin on top of the what we call the gas. There, we have a much more of a shiloh. Maybe you're going to make it. Consider you're going to touch the basin while you're pouring in the grapes. And that's the shiloh if it makes a yain nesach or not. So let's see. Why? Mishum lech amar nazir is chor schor lekarmel letikra. Whether it's besalit, whether it's with baskets, one in test of base, or with the diarin, which are Rashi says gigi yastana, small little baskets, small casks. Even though it's pouring, mutter, we're not worried. So what's the shiloh? Amalei heavy cameras. You're discussing. We did it. Avodah we're heavy. It's mutter. What's my shayla? No, lekatchila kamina. My whole shayla of lech aminizira is all lekatchila. So Avodah is no shayla. You can't bring a rye from there. Who esrayga? The nafal chavisa the chamer. What happened was that esrog fell into a barrel of wine. It was starting to sink. So came a guy, he jumps up, idra the chavim v'shakla, like that, he grabs it. Amalu Rav Ashi, grab his hand. Why? Because for the Bahala, to give a simple level, to give context, the guy sees the esrog falling. He quickly jumps, grabs the esrog like that, it doesn't sink. I guess once it sinks, make believe it's a very big vat. So you can't reach it once it falls. So on a simple level, now that he's holding on to the esrog, the Bahala stops. Now he says, let me chaparayim. Let me make a yain nesach on the way out. So what do? Two things. First, grab his hand so he can't move his hand out. And we're going to see spill the barrel until his hand is not b'chlal touching the wine. We saw earlier regarding making the measurements on Nunches, where he could put his hand to measure. Why over there you don't have a word to take it out? Again, when you're measuring in, out, there's no problem. He's focused on measurements. Measuring came over here by the esrog, you're going to have to say that once you caught it, the bahal is over. So what happened? First grab his hand, like that he should have making the ainesech. Ubertsua, the shaifa, and pour it like that till the wine recedes, like he's not in it b'chlal. Amar Rashi, hay oivir chavim the naske lecham the the kavana. He mamish went. He said, "La kishkish, I'm going to go and turn it to yain nesach just to get it." What is the halacha regarding? Do we consider it like that we saw in Babakam the sugyos of the chavim shehizik? The halacha is chayiv. Maybe we consider this not hezek, and it should be chayiv. The Gemara, after the zabun oivir chavim machrina, it's aser. However, shari leil mishkol demem ahu oivir chavim. My time, you know what? Miklakal, he's mamish burning it. Therefore, it's mutter. After the guy says, "Okay, I'll pay you. I can take it." In Echanami, it says they bring down. Amar Rav Ashi, this type of concept that is considered hezek, the Tanya oivir kachavim shenasach yaino sheisrael sheloi b'fnei avodas chavim is aser. The sheet the Tanakama is, it's aser. However, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda Meser Matim Shum Shnei Dvar. First of all, echad she'ein menaschen yain ela b'fnei avodas chavim. First of all, what's in front of it? The echad, which is the raya, she'oim eloi loy kol mencha loy kol menach she'ta'asa yain eloi tzi. Zok Rashi, this is the raya. We clearly see that a person can say you have no right to what? To make ma yain aser. And that's the makar to say, at least for Shitas Darabanan over here, that he doesn't have a rech to touch it. Therefore, on a simple level, we can understand that it should be chayiv, mitam, hezek, and yet Hashem. Next week, we're going to pick up from the bottom of the test, Amud Beis.